Okay, and we're recording. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all for coming. And we're going to be talking about just like a med school like application pep rally thing, just like to talk about final things that you guys are probably considering as you're about to submit your application. Yeah, we have three wonderful panelists here today, Brandon, Michaela, and Holly. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves really quick? Just talk about it's like where you are in your med school journey now.
Yeah, I can start. I'm Brandon. I am a first-year PhD student doing the MD PhD program. So I've already done 2 years of medical school, wrapping up my first year of PhD. I also was a Bruin for undergrad. I graduated in 2017 with a major in MIMG. Then I worked doing research for 2 years before starting medical school.
Hi, everybody. My name is Holly. I am currently in my third year of med school on rotations right now. I am also a Bruin, graduated from MCDB and biomedical research minor in 2019. And I was also a community college transfer student. So today I'll talk a little bit about specific tips I have for CC transfer students as well.
And then, hi everyone. My name is Michaela. I am not a double Bruin, sadly, but I went to undergrad back in my home state of South Dakota, moved out here for medical school, majored in biology and played golf in college. And then I didn't take any gap years, and similar to Holly, we just started our, what would be like third year of medical school.
Great. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with some questions. We got a lot of questions today. So first off, how did you stay organized while finalizing your application? Did you set a timeline for yourself, or did you just sort of wing it and submit when everything was ready?
I guess I can start again. In terms of timelines, I didn't set any like hard cutoffs for myself because I felt like that put a lot of additional pressure and like an already like very stressful like time in my life, which is like doing applications and stuff. But because of that, I did end up submitting a little later than a lot of other people would prefer to, which can be pretty important. Like applying earlier. So, but I think everything worked out in the end for me because like I just really didn't want like hard deadlines because I knew I would stress and be like, oh, like crap, my essays aren't done by this specific date. And like I feel like it would have decreased the quality of my application if I had, thought about all that stress a lot.
Okay, I think I can go next. I did set a deadline for myself, knowing that applications are being reviewed on kind of a rolling basis. And so I wanted to make sure that I make it to like one of the first waves of applications sent to school post verification. And so I aim to submit it within 1 week. Within the first week of June. And I think I actually submitted maybe like June 6th or June 7th. So pretty much at the very end of what I gave myself. But I agree with Brandon. It was very stressful to kind of have that harsh deadline for myself. And as a result, I was a little bit burnt out and didn't want to do application things and pre-write my secondaries and whatnot. And ultimately what ended up being kind of the bottleneck or like the rate limiting step was my secondary turnaround time, which ended up because schools usually don't review your applications until you submitted everything, including your secondary. So I think whatever that optimizes your mental health while optimizing the early submission date would be ideal.
And then I similarly tried to gauge like when schools, when they're like due. I made a little spreadsheet for myself to keep track of. And I tried to submit my. Can you hear me still, Martina?
You're cutting out a little bit, but I can hear you.
Okay. I submit my primary early and then try to do my secondaries. Yeah, we can talk about that later, but tried to just like keep a timeline for myself. And just for me, it was less stress in terms of like knowing when things were due.
So someone just really quickly asked in the chat, what is the best time frame to submit your app? When is the best time? What's too late? Does anyone remember like actual dates?
It changes a little bit every year, but the beginning of May, that's when MCAS opens. So that's when you can start actually typing in your information, pasting in your essays, putting your grades in, and starting to request transcripts and having MCAS store your transcripts with your application. And then by the end of May/early June, that's when you can actually submit your primary application, which consists of your personal statement and your work and activities descriptions. And that you, however, that you can submit it as early as you can. But basically, after you submit your primary application, it takes schools anywhere from 2 weeks to like a month to verify your grades. So someone will actually, look at the transcripts you send them and compare them with the grades that you enter and making sure that those are properly categorized and properly documented. And the earlier you submit, the faster that turnaround is. But sometime near the end of June, it was like June 25th when I applied, then the school sent out their first wave of MCAS sends out the first wave of applications to each individual schools. And then once those schools receive your primary application, a few number of schools will do a selection process to see if they want to send out a secondary, but most schools will automatically send you a secondary to complete. And that's school specific. So imagine like if you apply to 30 schools, you're going to have 30 different set of secondaries to complete after you submit your primary. But I guess the main thing about just submitting early is that the later you submit, the longer kind of the verification process takes, and the more delayed possibly your application would be sent to the individual schools.
Thank you for that, Holly. Very thorough. Seems like we lost Michaela for a little bit, but she might just be having connection issues. Okay, so we'll just move on to the next question. So did you have other people look over your personal statements, and when did you decide your personal statement was ready?
Yeah, I'll start again. Yes, I think it's always good to have people look over your personal statements. Med Mentors has like a personal statement reviewing like service. I don't know what else to call it. And so that's really good because you have current medical students who have gone through the process successfully, looking over your personal statements. What I did was I had like professors read over my personal statements because I felt that they knew me like on a more professional level, and they could kind of read the essay with the perspective of like as if they were sitting on an admissions committee. So I found that really helpful. I didn't really ask my like fellow pre-meds to read over my essays because I felt that like my fellow pre-meds also were in the same boat as me where like we didn't really know what like admissions committees were looking for or like, what sounded good, what didn't sound good. We were all kind of clueless together. So I kind of stayed away from getting my like peers to read over my essays.
Yeah, similarly, I try not to ask my fellow pre-meds to read, except for two exceptions. One was if someone is a really excellent writer and they happen to be a pre-med, then you're utilizing their writing abilities and using that to help you. And then the other exception was I asked my roommates to help me, one of whom was a pre-med, but just to kind of help me brainstorm ideas in the very beginning stages of writing, to just kind of have someone there to allow me to thought dump everything and have someone there to kind of organize things and talk things through and kind of find out a logical sequence of events that led me to like applying today kind of thing. Yeah, otherwise I mostly actually utilize services like the Undergraduate Writing Center. I think when I applied, it was like probably the first year of the application feedback initiative from mentors, which is kind of cool. Yeah, because it started in your year, Brandon. So I benefited from it because I'm a year after you. So that was really cool to have actual med students to read over the essays for me too. And then asking, I think I actually used the scholarship center too, the one on the hill in Cobell, just one time. Just cause I just wanted to make sure that someone who regularly reviews applications, even though it's not med school applications, they review scholarship applications, can also kind of lay their eyes on it and making sure that they look okay too.
Okay, so did you have any experiences that were ongoing at the time that you submitted your application? And if so, how did you write about that experience?
Yeah, so at the time I was applying, I was working full-time in a research lab. And research was a very big component of my application because I was applying to do an MD PhD program. So in terms of so on your application, you list all your activities and then you kind of list the number of hours that you put into them. Even though so for activities that are ongoing, for example, research that I was continuously doing, you can report the number of expected hours rather than only reporting the number of hours that you've done. So I knew I would still be working full-time doing research throughout the whole application process. So that added a really large chunk of hours I hadn't actually completed, but I was expecting to complete for that certain activity.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that. That's something I absolutely didn't know before applying, was that you can project hours. And so if you feel like there's a weak component of your application, let's say you feel like you don't have a lot of clinical experiences, but you feel otherwise very ready to apply, then if you start an experience prior to you submitting the application, so maybe like May-ish, maybe, or at latest maybe early June, then you can technically list it and then project the hours from it. But yeah, again, you have to start that experience prior to you submitting it. You can't project like a future activity that you haven't started, if that makes sense. And hi, Michaela, welcome back.
Sorry, guys, my internet decided to crash.
No worries, welcome back. We were just talking about any experiences that were ongoing at the time that you submitted your app, and just like how you wrote about that experience and navigated it. Oh, it seems like you might be frozen again.
Oh no. But I guess I can add a little bit more about how you can write about it. So if you start like a completely brand new experience that you've never had, I actually don't have experience with that. So Brennan, you can chime in. But I projected experience. I projected kind of the lab that I was already in, that I continue to work on in during my gap year. So I already kind of talked about the things that I did, but with one sentence, I talk about the projects that I'll be taking on as an SRA working in my lab during my gap year. And then, yeah, so I guess you can write about whatever experience you've already had, even if it's very limited, and then kind of write about some of the future experiences that you will have.
Yeah, I will just add to that, that a lot of the application will be heavily based on your past experiences, because the people reading your applications want to know not only what you did, but what you learned from those experiences. So I personally feel if you're writing about what you're going to do in the future, there's not much that you can say that oh, from this experience I learned blah 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 blah, because you haven't really done it yet. So I feel it could be a little weaker to write about future experiences, but I don't have experience with that. I'm just kind of speaking out loud, speaking my thoughts.
Am I still frozen?
No, you're good.
Okay, great. I would piggyback off what Brandon said. And I actually think that the secondaries are a great time to catch people up to speed in terms of what you've done since your primary. So new experiences.
Okay, and then I guess another question in the chat, just really quick. How do you guys feel about putting too much or too little in your activities section? I've personally heard that some people feel that you should fill out all 15 spaces, even if you don't think the experience is super significant, just because you never know who's going to read your application. But I've also heard people not doing that and just submitting, like just entering the activities that they actually want to talk about more. What do you guys think about that?
I'll start off again. I used all 15 because I had a lot that I wanted to talk about. I know plenty of people who have used up all 15, and I know plenty of people who have not used up all 15 that are in medical school. So there is no right or wrong answer. It really just comes down to like, what do you want to write about? And for me, I had 15 things I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, exact same boat. I ended up using all 15 because I didn't realize that there's a lot of things that I didn't know about that could end up on the application. Like things like, like things that you can kind of group differently. And things like hobbies, I didn't know you can write about like before I applied. Things like random honors and awards that you've gotten, you can literally have like a section just to kind of list them out. So there's little spaces that were very helpful to utilize. So I ended up using all 15, but I didn't feel the need to kind of stretch it out unnecessarily to fill up the spaces. And like I've known plenty of people who didn't use up all 15 and are in great schools. And I think just think like after you write your application, right, you sit back and you kind of think about the story that you're portraying, the kind of whole package that you're portraying. Sometimes the more you add, the messier it gets, and the less impressionable you become. So it's kind of thinking about how you can strike a good balance to make yourself as impressionable as you can.
Yeah, that's a really good point about like selling your package, right? Like I personally feel like applications with a strong theme that ties everything together tend to be like very strong applications versus like applications where, they're just kind of all over the place, like Holly was saying. So if you haven't yet, try to tie your entire package, your primary and your secondary, into like some common theme, something that like people can remember you as, like, oh, there's an applicant that is like super passionate about research or like community service or like serving a certain population, whatever your like theme is, right? Like for me, mine was like scientific education and outreach. And yeah, hobbies like 100% go into the activity section. I wrote about being a hip hop dancer, has nothing to do with anything related to medicine, but it's me. So I put it into my activities.
Totally agree on the hobbies. Holly, did you include a hobby?
I did. I kind of lumped some of the hobbies that I had together. Yeah, again, don't try to tie it to medicine. It'll be too much.
Yeah, I did too. I think hobbies are a great idea. And then one more quick question. So for the works and activities section, do you recommend using anecdotes in the descriptions, especially for experiences that are more self-explanatory, such as being a tutor or a youth sports coach? I've seen conflicting opinions online. So I guess basically, do you just write what you did, or do you show what you learned through an anecdote? I don't know. I hope I relayed that question well.
So out of your 15 activities, you get to pick 3 of them that were your most meaningful, right? And you get twice or maybe even 3 times the amount of space to write about them. So for those, I kept the description very like, this is what the activity is. And then I used the entire additional space to kind of tell the story. so that if my reader wanted just a plain description, they knew where to find it. If they wanted to like hear about my experience, they knew where to find it, 2 separate sections. For the activities that I didn't pick as my main 3, you kind of have to do a mixture of both, right? So for something like tutoring, you don't have to explain what tutoring is. Everyone knows. For like shadowing, you don't have to explain it. But if you like were a part of an organization that, you know, your general reader is not going to know about, yeah, like dedicate some characters to explain what that activity is, but don't only explain what that activity is. Ultimately, your reader wants to know, again, what you gained from each experience.
Yeah, agreed. I think when you have the allotted characters for your most meaningful activities, and for sure, include anecdotes, because those usually make it more pleasant to read. And then otherwise, it really depends, right? Like if you're just kind of listing the like honors and awards that you've gotten, then you just list them. You don't need to like make them into a story. If you're kind of just listing your shadowing experiences, you can just list them. But then at the end, you can add a little blurb about like some reflections that you have, any kind of reflections that you have from the shadowing experiences. But I'd say this tip that I gotten, I really liked, and that's from your working activities. If it's applicable, kind of talk about your motivation for starting it. So I think my general because it'll kind of give the reader kind of a more like holistic understanding of why you do certain activities and get your passion better, get to know your passion better. So kind of start the working activities with 1 sentence about why you joined something, and then if it's not self-explanatory, like 1 sentence maybe on what you actually did, but then use the rest for like takeaways and how that has influenced you as a person. It doesn't even have to be how that has influenced you to go to medical school, just how that has impacted your growth. Yeah, I think when students kind of just write about, list kind of what they did, it's oftentimes really kind of dry to read them and hard to put it together to ultimately go back to the person. So I like it when students kind of write a little bit about their motivation for joining or doing the different activities that they did.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so how did you all narrow down the list of schools that you applied to?
I applied to 16, but it was a little different process because I was applying MD PhD programs. I very much picked schools where I would only want to attend. Basically, if I got in nowhere except for a school, and basically so I picked 16, right? Like my 17th school, like if I had gotten nowhere else, like I probably wouldn't have wanted to go to that 17th school. So I just like left it off my list. But yeah, I'm a little different than like the regular MD track, so I'll let the others speak more.
I will try. I'm on my phone now, so hopefully this works a little better. But I applied to probably like 25 schools, but that was because I wanted to go somewhere outside my home state. So I wasn't really tied to staying super close to home per se, and I wanted to experience something new. And I felt like applying to that amount of schools would give me those opportunities. And then I really tried to like look into the schools. If I knew someone at that school or someone who had gone through the application process, like reaching out to them ahead of time, I thought was really helpful. If you have that resource, just to kind of gauge what their experience was, either during the interview process or if they attend there, because I think that other students' perspectives can save you in terms of applying to schools that maybe they didn't have good experiences at. So I tried to utilize other individuals in terms of, what was their experience on the interview track, or whatever that may be. And then ultimately it was just like what types of opportunities the schools had. So, really look into the websites, because schools love to share videos and student experiences. And so try to see if you could see yourself at that school through a lot of the resources they have online.
For me, being a California applicant and wanting to maybe stay in California, I think it's because California is saturated with pre-meds, and a lot of schools are also not protective for Californians. It's hard for us to be selective about our schools. So if you do want to stay in California, then I would apply to most California schools, except for maybe some more specialty schools. Like, for example, Loma Linda is a more religious schools or more faith-based. So if you feel like you wouldn't see yourself in it, then wouldn't apply. And then I think there's like a for-profit school. I don't remember the name, that started not too long ago in California too. So if you don't want to go there, then obviously don't apply. And then after that, then I started adding schools from out of states. How I did that was, first I wanted to make sure that they don't have a strong in-state preference. And there's like a document you can Google from MCAS that tells you what percentage of, I think, accepted students and matriculants are from out of states versus in states. And if it's like almost 100% or like 95% in-state preference and you're not from that state, then I didn't think it would be worth a shot for me to do it. And then otherwise, I just kind of use the typical like GPA, MCAT, try to apply to schools that are kind of around that region, some above, some below, and knowing very well that there's not really a safety school. So trying to apply to like a broad range, as broad as I can. So I ultimately apply, I think initially when I submitted primaries, to 28 schools. And then, as I'm approaching the end of secondaries, I got a little anxious. I was like, oh my gosh, what if no schools accept me? And so I like added like a school here. And then 2 days later, I'm like, oh no, I'll add another school. So I added a school later. So you can always add more schools as the cycle goes on. So I think ultimately maybe I applied to like 32 schools. Yeah.
Great. So when did you start working on secondary essays? Did you wait until schools sent you them, or did you start pre-writing answers to questions that were likely to come up?
So you can pretty much expect an overcoming obstacles essay. You can pretty much expect some sort of diversity statement. You can pretty much expect, why do you want to come to our school? And then, so those three, like, you'll get. And then everything else like could be common, but for those you can definitely pre-write. What my advice is think about what you've already written in your personal statement, think about what you've written in your activities, and again, use your secondaries to help build your theme that you're trying to convey to your reader. And anything that you don't really talk about in your primary, but you want to emphasize, that definitely should go into your secondaries. My strategy was like, okay, talk about some things here, some things here, some things here, just so that like, so that I cover all my bases, but also things that I thought were really important to my application, I repeated in multiple places as well. So for example, like I talked about science education, like in my primary and in my secondaries. Obviously, I didn't say like the same exact thing, but like it was important enough to me for me to emphasize to the reader, like, hey, like I'm repeating this because I want you to pick up on like how important this is to me.
I would completely agree with that. And I was applying while still a student. And so I was like the summer before my senior year, I think I was doing a research internship or something during that summer. So I knew it was going to be kind of a hectic summer between trying to write secondaries and still engage in an internship and other things. And so I went on to Student Doctor Network, and there's actually a lot of secondaries on there from just about every single school. And in hindsight, they're actually pretty accurate. They don't change that much year to year. Some of them were different, but I wanted to know like what to expect. And kind of like Brandon was saying, some of them are pretty broad in terms of like, some sort of adversity you went through, or diversity, as well as like why you want to come to our school. But some of them are more specific. And so if you have the time and you're eager to start writing secondaries, you can always look on Student Doctor Network, or probably Reddit too, and try to find like what some of the secondaries might be. And in terms of, content to include, I know this was mentioned like during the primaries, but in some of your experiences that you want to highlight, but I also used it to kind of update schools in terms of like some of those experiences I'd had since submitting primaries, stuff I had been working on, or more new experiences maybe I wanted to highlight or expand upon. So I think that's a great opportunity, as well as all the things Brandon said, to highlight.
Yeah, I would do what they're telling you to do. Don't do what I did, which is, like I said, getting burnt out after primaries. And so between the 2 weeks between primaries and secondaries, it's basically kind of like dead on the inside and not wanting to do anything application related. And then a ton of secondaries hit, and then go into dark stages of life. But in terms of timing, I think there's like some people on the streets, they say that you should submit it within 2 weeks of when you get the secondary. But the idea behind that is just, in order for you to show that you're interested in the school too, it's good to have like a quicker secondary submission turnaround time. And so I prioritize the turnaround time based on how interested you are to attend certain schools. And so like, if you apply to many schools, like 20 schools, you're not going to, I don't think it's super realistic to submit everything within 2 weeks. And so some schools are just going to, get some more love. Some schools get some less love, and that's okay. You prioritize who you want to give more love to, and vice versa. And ultimately, there's always stories about students, who say that, oh, I submitted the secondary 2 months late, and now I'm attending the school. So it's definitely not like a hard and fast rule. So don't ruin your mental health for it. Just do the best you can to try to submit them as soon as possible.
Yeah, so I was going into the next question I was actually going to ask about how quickly you submitted your secondaries in general, and then did you also have people look over your answers for the secondaries, or did you just submit them?
Yeah, so in terms of how quickly, echo what everyone else has said. In terms of having people look over them, I did have people look over them, but much less so than the personal statement, just because the turnaround time is faster. You just don't really have a lot of time to like sit down with like feedback and do like hardcore edits and like multiple rounds of like edits. That's all I'd say. But,
yeah. I would say in terms of turnaround, yeah, just 2 to 3 weeks. If it's a month, also okay. Just, like Holly was saying, whatever time frame you can do that isn't going to be demanding on your mental health, I think is really important, because you have to remember that it's kind of a marathon applying to medical schools. It's not like, you just get everything done in May and then you're done. It kind of drags on throughout the summer and then throughout interview season. So you have to really maintain your stamina. And then in terms of having people look at them, I think I was so like burnt out after my personal statement and primary stuff. And so I think I like put them through Grammarly, just the free version, to make sure they were error free. And a lot of them, kind of like went off of some of the experience I'd had or whatnot. But I didn't do any sort of like extensive review by anyone, just because it was, there's a lot of secondaries. And then also I think I was just kind of burning out or losing steam.
Yeah, similarly, I think except with the exception of like a couple schools that I really cared about, for those I just sent it to somebody who's just making sure that it sounds okay, it's coherent. I also didn't really have people look at them. It's really like up to whatever you can take. If you have the capacity to like really polish each one, then by all means do it, because it's only going to make it even better. But don't like none of us really sent every single one of them to people, so don't feel pressure to have to do that.
Okay, so do you have any general advice on preparing for interviews? For example, reading up on the school's mission statement or initiatives beforehand, or practicing answers to common questions? How did you prepare?
This might be a hot take, but every time I hear people like say like look up a school's mission statement, I always kind of like roll my eyes, because I don't know, I feel like every medical school has like the same mission, right? Like to train doctors, and like, nobody's gonna have a mission statement that's like super far off from another school. Like I don't even know what UCLA's mission statement is, but it's probably along the lines of like training doctors to like help people and blah, 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 blah. So that's just my hot take. Some people will probably get mad at me for that. But in terms of like preparing for like MMIs, for example, they're kind of like hard to prepare for, because you can really get questions about anything. And so I would just like, if you're like someone who's shy, I would definitely get comfortable with like talking to people, like make sure you make eye contact. I like literally had an interviewer tell me that like they pay attention to that kind of stuff. So just like, if you're not great at interpersonal skills, work on that. But like in terms of preparing for questions, I think that's a little bit more difficult.
I would agree in that sense. I did try to think about some of the general questions that come up in basically every school, being like, why do you want to be a doctor? Why are you interested in our school? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What's the time you failed and what did you learn from that? So I tried to think of just like some of those general questions in terms of not necessarily formulating an exact answer about what I was going to say, but just having an idea of what I wanted to maybe talk about or touch on. Because I think that does help in terms of when you're, sitting in front of someone or multiple people on the spot, stressed. It's yeah, exactly. Tell me about yourself. So, having that down to 1 to 2 minutes, whatever it is, I think is really helpful. But beyond that, I don't think so. There's a lot, you can find a lot of things on Student Doctor Network or Reddit in terms of like things you could prepare. But I think just having maybe some of those general things down is important. And then beyond that, yeah, don't be too stringent to either in terms of like how you expect yourself to answer. I think a lot of the best interviews just come naturally in terms of conversation, and you'll actually be surprised that most interviews are just very conversational. So they really just want to get to know you. And I had multiple interviews that we didn't even talk about medicine or we talked about golf. Like I said, I was a golfer, so we talked about golf the entire time, and then you leave and you're like, wait, how are they going to know that I really want to be a doctor? But at the end of the day, it's just trying to show your true self to others.
Yeah, I agree. I guess just to list some specific resources that you could tap into. So I met up with Christina, the pre-health counselor for all pre-meds at UCLA from the Career Center. I'm laughing because there's a lot of pre-meds and there's one of her, and had a couple appointments just to work on MMIs and interview questions. And I did that actually as a post-grad student. I did that just the summer after I graduated. So she's super kind if you want to connect with her. I thought those sessions were super helpful to kind of point me towards how I can improve on specifically the MMIs. I think MMIs take like a certain structure of thinking and can use some practice. Other resources, I can drop a link here. There's this podcast called All Access Medical School Admission Podcast, where the host interviews AdCom members from different schools about what they look for in their students, and oftentimes dive into very deeply what their school's mission is about, what they're looking for in their applicants, what's unique about their school, what their interview days are like. It's like they're literally amazing. And I think they started like midway through my application season, so I didn't like benefit from it fully, but you can benefit from it fully. So definitely you can use that to figure out kind of what the culture of the school is like, for sure. And then lastly, just practice. You can practice with your roommates. You can practice by videotaping yourself over Zoom and then watching it after and cringe over it, but also improve from it. And just be a personable person. You'll be all fine.
Great. And now jumping ahead to after the interview, is it worth it to update schools on ongoing achievements and activities after interviewing?
I personally did not have any major updates to give, so I did not give any updates. I feel like minor updates weren't important enough for me to warrant sending them an extra document.
Yeah, same boat, so I won't comment too much on it.
Also had the same experience.
Okay. And how did you all keep yourself busy while waiting for communications from schools? How do you stay motivated during this very long application process?
Well, I was working full time, so I kept myself busy making money. But it can be a very long and like draining process. And, if the more you think about it, the more you panic and worry and stuff. My advice is like what's done is done. Like you put yourself onto the application, you wrote everything, like you put yourself out there. So like if they like you, they like you. And if they don't, like that's on them. Like you put yourself on that application, you put your heart into it. So yeah, don't preoccupy your time by like thinking about what if this, what if that. Like things will work out in the end. And so I would just say like, you do you, don't worry too much about the process. It's a lot of waiting.
I would agree. It's a lot of like hurry up and wait. So hurry up and get your primaries in, hurry up and get your secondaries in, and then, wait for interviews, and then, hurry up and make sure you're ready to interview, and then travel or whatever it may be. And then it's really a long waiting process after that. And I was in a similar but different boat in that I was still in school. And so I had my last year of college and golf and everything else kind of like keeping me sane, or more insane, really. But then, yeah, I think I, live by the motto that like, you can't change it. So why are you going to worry about it? Or how is that going to change anything? And I do think though, if you feel strongly about a program or a couple programs, like sending them, some schools let you send like a letter of intent, or, kind of with your updates in terms of, if you really want to go there. And I have heard from schools that they do consider those. And so if it's somewhere you really want to go, obviously like ethically, you shouldn't send one to every single school. But schools that you felt strongly about, that you thought you interviewed well at, that you really want to attend, if you have the time and desire, like feel free to, send them an update and with your intent. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And then just to add on, some schools during interview will explicitly tell you to not send them anything, while other schools will kind of be like, it would be nice if you're interested in our school to let us know how you're doing, So for those schools, definitely send them a letter, because if you don't, then they'll assume that you're not interested and they won't accept you, even if you're like super qualified, just so that they can kind of protect their yield rate, I think. I might be totally wrong, but For me, also, I was working full time. I was also like working part-time as a tutor, keeping myself busy, but also trying to just like enjoy life a little bit before med school start, and before COVID hit. But I didn't know that then, obviously. But the timelines can be very different. I think what can be difficult is if you have friends who are also applying and they hear back before you do, and they get accepted to schools before you do, or vice versa. Like you get accepted to schools before they do, it can be a little bit like difficult, to not like you if you get in, you want to share your joy, but you don't want to make your friends feel bad, and vice versa. So I think that part can be a little bit tricky and sometimes discouraging. But again, just kind of knowing that you've like done everything that you can, and whatever happens, you're still going to be like a very kind, wonderful person at the end of the day. And even if you don't get into any schools, you can reapply, and do it again, and you'll I believe you can do it.
So we have some questions in the chat, kind of jumping all over the place, but for things like publications, is it better to list them all under one entry or separately? I've seen conflicting things about this as well.
I put them under one entry. And then for things like awards and stuff, I put that all under one entry as well. Just because I feel like, for me, I didn't want an activity to have like one sentence, like one award, like call it a day. Like it just felt like a waste of space. So I just like lumped everything together.
And usually you want to highlight like so many other things that it makes sense just to like put publications or awards into lumps, into one or two things.
I agree. And I didn't have any publications. I had poster presentations, so I lumped those all into one category.
Okay, great. Any last minute questions from our wonderful attendees here? Oh, okay. If you are a research-heavy applicant applying to the MD track, do you recommend not highlighting research in the personal statement if it is already highlighted in the activities for better balance? Worried that admissions would automatically reject and question why not apply MD, PhD? Brandon, what do you think?
Let's see. So I am very much an advocate of like, there's no bad thing to put in your application. Like people are always like asking me like, oh, what are red flags and stuff? And I'm like, hey, if it's like important to you, like put it in your application. And so if research is like a very important part of your application, like you definitely want to highlight it. If it's like super important, it's totally okay to highlight it in multiple locations in your application. Obviously you don't want to repeat too much, but I don't think you would get automatically rejected for talking about stuff that you're passionate about. That's like not really a concern. If anything, it'll make them curious and like want to ask you in person at an interview. But yeah, I really don't, in my opinion, I don't think there are really such things as like red flags where like, oh, I'm afraid to write about this or that. Like if it's important to you, like you should write about it because it's true to who you are.
Yeah, I'm raising my hand because I'm eager to answer this question because I also thought about the same thing. Like the theme of my personal statement was kind of to be both a clinician and also a researcher. And I think what you should think about is whether your research experiences have in any way, shape, or form influenced your decision to apply to medical school. And for me, I actually got into research before I even thought about medicine. I like wanted to do cancer research, and through that experience, I like just happened to join a translational research, and through that, I met some MDs and saw like the applications of the research work, and then got interested in medicine kind of after. And so it was kind of an integral part of why I decided to apply to med school. Then it makes sense for me to do that. So it's kind of like a case by case basis for how in depth you want to talk about research, but I definitely think it's complementary. And the top schools, they're all research heavy schools, right? And then research can look very different. It can be, basic science, it can be clinical research, it can be like public health research. It can look at like many forms. So kind of reflecting on the kind of research that you want to do that would complement your career as a physician, and expressing that on your application, I think would be my best advice.
Great. And then just one last question. What is a normal amount or range of interviews to do? I feel like this can be kind of a weird subject. People don't really like to talk about these, like, where they interviewed and stuff, but I would personally just say that there is no normal range. I mean, it really depends on like what schools you applied to, like how well the list of schools you applied to actually matches with your application. I don't know. And I mean, at the end of the day, I guess it technically only takes like one interview and one acceptance, but I don't know if anyone has anything they want to add to this.
I mean, I can be like straightforward. I had 6 interviews out of the 16 places that I applied to. At my first interview, I met another applicant who had done like 10 interviews already. And I was like, I mean, honestly, like not really bothered or fazed by that, and neither should you, because again, like the number of interviews doesn't really matter. Sure, it like might increase your chances, like because it's a numbers game, but like what Martina says is true. Like you really only need like one acceptance. But yeah, I mean, like the number of interviews you get, like, I don't know, I like turned down some interviews too, because after a certain point I was like, well, I got interviews at some schools that I really, really, really want to go to, and like this interview is like kind of more of a backup. So like, I don't know, like the number of interviews is not actually a super meaningful metric in my opinion.
I will say too, I met some people who had 1 or 2 interviews and got in, and other people who had like 6, 7, 8 and didn't get in. So by no means is like more interviews necessarily better. It's really like the quality of your interview and how that matches your application and how the school thinks, you would fit with their culture.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's like such a crapshoot too. Like I feel like if I apply again with the exact same application, I will get like a totally different number of interviews and totally different set of schools who accept me. And so I would not stress out too much about that. And also just because it's just not controllable, right? Like if this is something that's easily controllable, then I'll tell you everything about it so that you can do exactly all that and maximize your chance. But this, I feel like knowing how many other interviews other people have, oftentimes just kind of get into your psychic and make you more anxious. And yeah, I don't just if you give it your best shot, then just trust the process and knowing that you've already did all you can.
Yeah, treat every interview like it's your one and only interview and just do your best. Yeah, great. So we're at 8 o'clock. If anyone has any last minute things they want to say or any last minute words of advice, otherwise we're gonna wrap up pretty soon. We're good. We got a lot of really good information.
Good luck. Hang in there. You'll survive. Yeah. It's a long haul, but it's worth it.
Yeah, seek out for support when you do need it, because you will need it.
Yes, definitely lean on friends and family. It's a long year, the application. All right, well, thank you all for coming. Thank you all, amazing panelists, for your answer is very thoughtful. Yeah, I'm going to stop the